This is the post office in Saint-Germain-en-Laye, on the outskirts of Paris. It's a beautiful building, and I thought it's a good example to demonstrate my method of drawing freehand in ink to hopefully get an accurate drawing of whatever my subject is. So I always start with a part of the building which I think I can draw fairly accurately most easily. So it's going to be, in this case, the left-hand side of this central portion. And as you can see, I do establish the two lines that define half of this shape. Now, because there's this street lamp in the front of it, I need to position that so that I can draw what's behind it around it. But at this point, I'm only drawing what I need to draw to establish the building more fully, because I don't really know at this point how far down this street lamp's going to go. So I'm now trying to position the three windows behind the lamppost in the center. Once I get these in place, then I can align the windows underneath with them. The important thing is, firstly, to have them look vaguely the same size, and then secondly, to make sure the perspective angles match the line I've already drawn and the lines I'm going to want to draw further down the building, because it's not a huge angle going down to the left along the front of the building, and as the lines go down towards the ground, they'll approach horizontal more. So I've established the width now of this center part, and so now I'm going to go down probably just as far as the top of the car at this point. I've decided not to draw the car that's closest to us, because that makes the drawing look a bit much like a row of cars with a nice building in the background. But I do like the cars there because they do give the sense of this is a building, a working building in a working town that's got people in it going about their business. So I do like the context of the row of cars, but I'm just going to remove that first one and just fudge what we can't see of the next car. So I'm doing this, putting some of the hatching in to represent the shade behind the windows.
Just to, in effect, bring them down a bit. Or maybe not.
So now I'm getting the division in place that has the sign on it, and also now I can do the door underneath it. So the principle is always to try and get the proportions of the shapes correct and to align with what I've already drawn. And if I need to push a line out a little bit, I do. You'll see me constantly make adjustments to lines that aren't angled quite right. At some point I realized that my vertical lines seemed to slope slightly to the right as they came down the page. So I adjusted my seating position so I was more square onto the drawing and shifted them just a little bit. And I always find that works better at the end than leaving them in the wrong place. So now I'm putting some lines in for more shading, and I start to position the top of this car, because I need to know now where to stop this lamppost and the subsequent lampposts. Now all the cars pretty much line up with this one I've just drawn. So I now align the top of the left side wing of the building with what I've drawn, and I try and keep the proportions right as I align and draw the shapes. So I actually get how far out the building goes by establishing the widths for the wall, window and wall. And then I tentatively start to put the horizontal divisions in, aligning them with what I've already drawn. So it's that principle. I draw carefully at the start, work hard to get my proportions drawn as accurately as possible, and then from a relatively small amount of the drawing done very carefully and a lot more slowly, I move outwards, aligning each new part with what I've already drawn, and also working to get the proportions right. So if it's a rectangle, I try and not have my rectangle look too fat or too skinny. And I basically break the shapes up into circles and rectangles and start to see them that way. So I align the corner of this building from my reference with the gap between the window and the end of the wall, and then I draw it, working out the perspective angle as well. Now at this stage I wasn't going to add any hatching for shadow or for shade or for colour, but I do end up doing some a little bit at the end because I felt it would just bring out something of the visual characteristics of the building a bit more to do so. So now I'm working across, trying to establish this second light where it fits in terms of in front of the windows that are behind. And this lamppost has a few street signs on it as well. And I use the same principle to work across the right side wing of the building by basically establishing widths for the wall, the window, and then the wall. And that then gives me the edge of the building, which will let me plot the corner of the mansard roof for this section as well. It's just a little more laborious because I have to draw the detail around this lamppost. You'll notice that even with a lamppost, which is a solid black line subject pretty much, I don't just draw it either over the top of the building or draw the building going straight through it behind. I find that adds a confusion to perceiving what's in front, what's behind, and it flattens the effect of depth by stopping our lines just on each side of something that's in front. I find that it really does push forward the forward object. So once I've got my 3 vertical lines sort of in place for this right hand wing, it's easy enough then to just put the windows in and to align that top window in the mansard roof with what's behind, with what's below. Now for this decorative dormer window in the upper mansard window in the center, I align it using the windows below. The circle just sits back ever so slightly from the center window beneath. The important thing when we're drawing something at this scale with this much detail is that we know when to add some feel of the detail with our line, but when we also know when we just can't do it, because if we try and put too much detail in, our objects will usually end up becoming too large because there simply isn't room in the size of the drawing we're doing at the scale we're drawing for all the line widths. I'm using a 0.2mm pen. I was going to use a 0.3, but I decided that would make too thick and too heavy a line. I don't normally draw in a 0.2, not an entire drawing anyway. I often just use it for something further back from the 0.3mm drawing. So now I'm working on this side wall a little bit and trying to just check these angles. It's quite a steep angle. You see me just move the paper over. Well, I actually moved the camera over because I realized that I wasn't going to get the right hand side of the drawing in camera view if I left it where it was. So now I'm also starting to think of the foreground a bit. So I progress this closest car to get that in place, just to finish the details that I haven't done, because I want to also add some pedestrians to this scene. Now the star is the building, so I don't want any pedestrians to be too close. I don't want any figures that will draw too much attention to be too close, because generally people will take a greater focal attraction for us if we look at a scene, because we instinctively value people above other things. So I do want the people to be set back from where we're viewing this from, but I do want to get a sense of pedestrians, of a town, of of this is a, as I said before, this is a working building in a town. Do some more of the lines going backwards. Some more of the cars. Now, the buildings along this right-hand side street are very, very severely foreshortened. And so, again, I've got to be fairly disciplined to draw my lines close enough together. I need to align them firstly with the corresponding sections of the building that we see front on the right-hand side, on that right-hand wing of the building. But then I need to fit them into the perspective lines, and I need to be very careful with my proportions of the total width of the building down this side street that we can see. Again, if I don't do that with a fairly disciplined way, what will end up happening is the building will become wider than I want it to be, simply to accommodate all the lines for all the details I want to draw. And then it will change the perception of the street. It will look like the side of the building splays out at an angle rather than going back at 90 degrees. So you'll notice also I drew that detail on the right hand side going backwards with a very, well, an increasingly light touch. And that's also to help create the effect of depth of distance, because we don't see things as clearly when they're further away. And I do the same thing with this building on the left hand side. I draw it with a very light touch, both for detail and just with actually the physical thickness of the line as well. And then I strengthen in a moment the line on the left hand side of the building, just to define the building a little more clearly, a little more strongly from the scene behind it. Checking all this out now, and now I actually decide that I will put some hatching marks on the roof, because not so much to reflect the shadows, but to reflect the local colour. And I feel like these darker roofs just form part of the balance of the form that we see. And so I decide to do those as well. Of course, as in most cases, this reference photo will be available on my channel community page if you want to go there and print off a copy and have a go at drawing this beautiful post office on the outskirts of Paris yourself. And I'd finished doing this pretty much all over, and then I thought, no, look, I will actually do where the shadow, I will draw the shadow where it's being cast in a heavier line, just to give a little more sense of 3 dimensions, even though I wasn't going to. It was an afterthought, and I think it really helps snap the building into, I think, a slightly more visually dramatic feeling. So I'm just finishing the details in front. A little bit of shadow under the cars. I'm not really doing shadow, but I do find that cars without any shadow underneath just look like they're floating in space. So I always like to put a few lines horizontally between the wheels, at least, even if just that. And now I do some additional hatching on the mansard roofs just to reflect the shadow that we have happening here. It's not a great deal, but I think it makes such a difference, and the building just looks so much more 3 dimensions. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, I hope you found this interesting and helpful. I really enjoyed drawing it. Whatever you're drawing, however you're drawing it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.